All right. First of all, thank you all for coming here today, and I want to thank the legislators for coming here as well. Representative Claridis and I would like to just talk about a few things before we get into the meat of why we're here. What we're seeing really is a Democratic food fight at this point. We're seeing the Democratic legislators throwing food at the governor and the governor throwing it right back at the legislators. But the truth of the matter is that they wanted to tax groceries. And let's begin, it's a little dry toast, no pun intended, of how we got here, but let's be clear on how we got here. The law used to be that catering and eating establishments were required to charge a tax, a sales tax at 6.35%. And what was silent was supermarkets. And in the 90s and the 2000s, as supermarkets started to prepare food, as that was the trend, DRS issued a regulation. And the regulation it issued in 2002 said this: if a supermarket sells edible meals, if you would, they would be taxed just like restaurants. And they gave 6 or 7 examples of when you would tax and when you wouldn't tax. So if you got a food item and you went to the front by the cashier, no tax. But if there's a food court or you're eating it there, there's a tax. So that was covered in 2002 by regulations. So that's what the law was. What happened with this new bill is they took the word grocery store and they put it in statute next to the word catering and eating establishments. That changed the whole statute with respect to the sales tax. That's why when the DRS commissioner read it, he was reading the words as written. They're not ambiguous. There's no shades of gray in here. These are clear examples. When you look at the legislative intent, when I hear that talk about it, the legislative intent was to supersede the regulation that spoke about supermarkets in a particular scenario and say, we don't care about that regulation, we're putting it in statute, so it's all going to be taxed. That is the legislative history. That is what you're going to look at. And by the way, there is no legislative history in committee, on the Senate floor, or in the House that you could look to that would deviate from that rationale. You cannot fix this by 2, 3, 4, 5 people getting in the room and saying, ignore the words of a statute, listen to our press conference, because this is what we meant. The legislators on the Democratic side passed a budget that said you're taxing groceries absolute pure. Now, if they get it wrong, I get it. Then we got to go back into session and we have to fix it. But you can't say a wink and a nod that we're going to change it. Just think of the result. The DRS commissioner, very scholarly fellow, great education, government, came out, looked at it very objectively, and said, this is what you're going to tax. And then what we're going to let politicians in politics say, come on into the room, and I know that's what the words say, but we're getting killed out there politically. You need to change it to say something else. Do you realize how many rulings we get from Department of Public Health, DRS, DEP, that would put no security out there for folks to rely upon it, knowing it could be changed to the whim of politicians who put pressure on people? This commissioner did what was right. This commissioner read it the way it should be read. And there's no argument about that. That isn't what we meant. Let's go in a special session and let's fix this. Representative Claridis is going to tell you how we're going to get to that special session.
I am?
Yes, you are.
I am. Thank you, Senator. You know, we've all been around here long enough, and we've gone through enough bills, enough policies, enough debates and conversations, agreements, disagreements, to understand that one of two things happens. You either put something in a bill, whether it be a budget or another bill, that you either didn't mean, or you don't like the result. And unfortunately, in this situation, they wrote this bill in the budget. They wrote this budget bill. They voted affirmatively on this budget bill, and now they're shocked and appalled by what they wrote. And I would guess that if the public was not so outraged at what they're seeing and hearing, none of this would be happening. But the public is outraged because the public can't take it anymore. And the public is speaking. And that's why this is going on. We hear from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they're shocked at what the DRS commissioner and what DRS has interpreted. There are a lot of things that we put into budgets and bills that I will argue, and I think all of us will agree, might be vague, that need to be rewritten, that need to be maybe repealed and written again. This is not one of them. As Senator Fasano mentioned, it was very clear that throughout time, when prepared foods became much more common with our busy lives and our busy days and our busy jobs and families, that prepared foods were being sold in supermarkets and that they should be treated as such. That restaurants were paying that tax, they were preparing food, so supermarkets should also be paying that tax. As we've already mentioned, that is current law. What this bill did is it made it very clear by adding those two words, grocery store, it opened up a Pandora's box of all sorts of things to tax. And when the DRS commissioner, who is the governor's choice for commissioner, interpreted as such, they became amazed that this is what it is. So it was either done in a very negligent manner, which isn't good, or it was done intentionally. It's not DRS's fault. They interpreted language that was voted on and became law. And it is not true that we haven't increased tax rates in the state. By definition, by going from 6.35% to 7.35% is an increase in tax, not to mention any one of a number of things. I've never seen a group of people who wrote a bill, voted for the bill, and then were shocked at what it said in my life. So what we are proposing today and we are asking members to do is sign the petition to go into session to fix this. And the answer is not what we've heard from the administration and from the majority party. Oh, we can probably fix it on our own and, we can get this done ahead of time, maybe in the next week. I don't know what the fix is, because if they're not happy with DRS's interpretation, that is the actual language of the budget. So what will they fix? The only way to fix it is to go back into session and change it. Actually change it. It is not about, I don't like your interpretation, so just give me another one. This isn't pick and choose. This isn't a Chinese menu where you can pick the interpretation you like. The bill is what it is. The language is what it is, and that's what they intended. The governor said it. We needed more revenue, and we are going to get it this way. He said it directly. And then he decided a few days later that DRS needs to give him a new definition. The only true way to fix this is to go into special session, and we are asking every member of this legislature to sign the petition and bring it to the Secretary of State's office so we can do so.
The only other thing I want to add to all that is this. All of you know the issue with respect to the tip credit for waiters and waitresses. And if you recall, the argument has been that the Department of Labor way back when said, we're applying the 80-20 rule. And they put regulations, they put out guidelines of saying that if your waiter does 80% serving and 20% non-serving, you could pay tip credit. And restaurants all over this state relied upon that ruling. A lawyer challenged the ruling, and this legislators here, on both sides of the aisle, said, if people relied upon DOL, we need to protect DOL and the restaurants relied upon them, because the intent of that legislation that was passed and the intent of the guideline was to give guidance to the restaurants. So we changed the law in accordance with it, and the governor vetoed it, saying that isn't what the statute says. And it's retroactive. Therefore, we're not going to do it. This is the exact example. Just because this DRS commissioner is being told by the governor's office not to enforce the language. And just because the OPM commissioner is saying, we're going to change the intent in respect of the language, and just because the governor is saying, we didn't mean it, so we got to change it, but we're not going to change the language, doesn't mean future DRS commissioners, future governors are not going to say, no, the letter of the law is the letter of the law, just like this governor did to waiters and waitresses. You can't get it both ways. You can't argue the letter of the law is the letter of the law, and we're not going to go back and fix it because that was the letter of the law, and then turn around and say, but in this case, we're going to ignore the letter of the law because I'm getting political heat. It's illogical. It is illogical. And it is scary. It is scary to think that the majority party can get behind closed doors and change the language by virtue of coming out saying the intent isn't what we meant.
You know, and just to add to that, we've heard some comments from our colleagues in the majority party and the governor's office talking about this is important to do, we need the revenue because we want to make sure restaurants are treated fairly. Now, I don't know where the confusion lies, but it's been very clear that prepared foods are already taxed in supermarkets. That is current law. That has been current law for many years. So there's confusion on their side in that regard. And to Len's point, in the summer, the governor vetoed a bill that would have actually helped restaurants. And most importantly, it would have helped workers. Okay, because people that work in restaurants, typically, restaurants and bars, are people that have second jobs, that need flexibility because they have children at home, single parents, single mothers. And what's going to happen if this continues is these restaurants are going to close, and those people will not be able to have those jobs any longer. They will not have that flexibility to raise their children on their own and in their own way. This is a workers' bill, and it should be acted on as soon as possible.